Have you ever held something in your hands and realized this thing is older than the nation I live in? It is older than the language I speak, older than every modern idea I take for granted. Now imagine this. When most ancient books survived only in copies made, 1,000 years after the original, the New Testament breaks the chart. And we are not talking about centuries of silence. We are talking fragments that show up almost immediately after the apostles put pen to papyrus. And here's why that matters to you right now. Because in a world where people doubt and question and deconstruct and wonder if the Bible is just one more, ancient myth, this one fact flips the script. Why? Because it shows that Christian faith is rooted in a story anchored in real history, real ink, real hands, real people. Today I want to show you why the earliest New Testament papyri are not just interesting artifacts. They are evidence that the story we trust traveled faster and closer and more accurately to us than almost any writing in the ancient world. Are you ready? So let's go. Before we dive into today's topic, let me bring you back to where we've been. In episode 1, we found out the New Testament manuscript count is so massive it breaks every rule of ancient literature. In episode 2, we realized Christianity unintentionally saved the Greek language the New Testament was written in. And in episode 3, we saw that early Christian writers quoted scripture so relentlessly that their sermons alone could rebuke the New Testament text. Those 3 truths set the stage for something even more explosive: how early our earliest New Testament copies actually are. Because here's a reality check most people never hear. In the ancient world, the gap between an author writing a book and the earliest surviving copy is usually enormous. Sometimes 800 years or 1,000 years, even 1,200 years. That's like trying to verify, let's see, George Washington's handwriting using a copy made in the year 3000. But the New Testament doesn't play by those rules. And this is where it becomes personal. When someone comes and tells you,
we can't trust the Bible because it's too old or too copied or too changed,
they are not doubting the Bible actually. They are doubting a version of history that never existed. The earliest New Testament papyri don't whisper across centuries. They shout from the edge of the Apostolic Age. Let me paint the picture for you, okay? Most ancient writings survive like this. You hear nothing for hundreds of years, total radio silence. And then suddenly a dusty medieval manuscript appears, copied by a monk living a millennium after the author. Now, that's not a problem actually, that's the normal pattern. That's what historians expect. But what about the New Testament? Well, it breaks the pattern so hard, it's like it didn't get the memo. And we are talking about papyri, fragile sheets of pressed reeds that survive wars and humidity, the collapse of empire, the rise of religions, shifting trade routes, the burning of libraries, and centuries of human chaos. And still, they made it into our hands. These fragments refused to stay quiet. They refused to disappear. They refused to be erased by history. Now, here's where it gets jaw-dropping. Some of our earliest New Testament papyri were discovered within decades of the original writings. Not centuries, but decades. Take P52, for instance, the famous fragment of the Gospel of John. This amazing fragment is housed in the John Rylands Library in Manchester in UK, and is still on display under the call number Greek 457. I had the privilege of seeing this very fragment when I was working on my doctoral studies a couple of years ago. It's actually a very tiny, small fragment containing a portion of John's Gospel, chapter 18, verses 31 to 33 and 37 to 38. Since we can see that it's written on both sides, we call it a codex. Not a scroll, but a codex. A codex is more similar to our modern books today, written on both sides. So it has just a small portion of the Gospel of John, but its relevance lies in its significant early date. It's dated the early to mid 100s, probably around 125. And that means it could have been copied while people who personally heard the apostles were still alive. That's right. People who remembered the sound of their voices, and people who could have said, yes, I have heard that passage before. Even the most conservative scholarly datings place several papyri within the 2nd century, which is unheard of for ancient texts. For Plato, Aristotle, Tacitus, Thucydides, that's not even a category. No other ancient work gives us that kind of early window. And here's why that matters to you. Christianity is not built on distant legends formed through myths stacked on myths. It's built on writings that traveled fast, copied quickly, circulated broadly, and preserved close enough to the source that historians look at the evidence and say,
okay, this is unusually early.
But this isn't just a history lesson, it's a reminder that God doesn't let history fade. When culture tries to bury it, it rises. When time tries to erase it, it speaks again. When critics say it's unreliable, the dirt itself disagrees. These papyri, fragile, torn, brown, almost dust, are the receipts. They prove the message wasn't lost in the dark. It was carried, it was guarded, it was copied, it was protected not just by people, but by God's providence. Here's where the story gets even more electrifying. The reason these early papyri exist at all is because the Christian message didn't crawl through history. No, it ran. Think about it. If the early church had been a small, quiet, isolated group, we wouldn't have early manuscripts, right? We'd have late ones. We'd have scattered remnants. We'd have the kind of slow drip you see with most ancient authors. But Christianity exploded across the ancient world with so much energy, with so much passion, with so much sacrifice and urgency that the copying began immediately. This wasn't academic, it was survival, it was mission, it was hope on the move. Believers copied the words of Jesus because they needed them right now for worship, for teaching, for evangelism, for defending the faith, for building community in dozens of cities simultaneously. The gospel wasn't circulating because people were curious. It was circulating because people were being transformed. Then manuscripts appear everywhere. Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Rome, North Africa, even remote villages along caravan routes and seaports. This wide early spread means something historically massive. There was no time for one group to control the text or secretly rewrite the story. The message went viral in an age before the internet, before printing, before mass literacy. It was multiplying faster than any one person or institution could regulate. And here's the part that hits home for your life today. The same speed with which the gospel spread in ancient world is the same urgency with which God still works in ordinary people. History shows that when God moves, He moves quickly. When He speaks, His words travel. When God ignites a heart, the spark becomes a wildfire. The early papyri are a reminder that God doesn't waste time. He doesn't delay purpose. He doesn't sit back and hope someone notices. If the gospel could spread across continents in a generation, imagine what God can do in your life in a single season. The early manuscripts are not just historical evidence, they are spiritual evidence, proof of a God who acts, a God who moves, who multiplies, who accelerates, who preserves what matters most. They tells us the text was trustworthy because the movement was alive, and the movement of Jesus was alive because the Spirit is real. Therefore, when we step back and look at this episode, here's what becomes undeniable. The New Testament didn't drift slowly through history. No, it arrived and early. and loud and persistent. The earliest papyri cut the distance between us and the apostles to a level historians rarely get with any ancient writing. They remind us that the story we hold in our hands wasn't shaped by centuries of fog or layers or of myth. It was carried forward almost immediately, preserved by ordinary believers, protected through persecution, kept alive not by power but by passion, and that has everything to do with your life today. That's right. Because if God took care of the physical text in such a radical, against the odds way, imagine how much more He is capable of taking care of you. Imagine what He is writing or He is willing to preserve, protect, and carry in your story. Imagine what He refuses to let time erase. Imagine what He planted in you that He fully intends to see through. The earliest papyri whisper something deeper than history. They whisper that God is committed to His message, and He is committed to His people. But before we wrap this episode, we need to look ahead. Because if the manuscripts were so early, then naturally people ask,
okay, but what about the variants, right? Doesn't have so many manuscripts just mean we have more mistakes?
Well, and this is where the next episode changes everything. Most people think textual variants are proof of corruption. But what if, just think about this, what if the explosion of variants happened not because the text was falling apart, but because the Christian movement was growing too fast to keep up with itself? That's right. What if abundance, not distortion, was the real cause? That's where we are going next with episode 5. And trust me, once you see what exactly caused the variants, your confidence in the New Testament will grow, not shrink. I'll see you there.